So as Dr. King said, we're called to speak for the weak, the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, and for those it calls its enemies. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers. We at the OJRC are attempting to speak for those the state calls criminals. For no document from human hands or the state can make these humans any less our brothers and sisters. So nationally, I can only think of a few individuals who walk this truth better than anyone else. And like I said, it's been really amazing hanging out with this individual today. And so we're really honored and excited to host Shaun King for our fundraiser and to speak more about this. And I spent the day with him, and what I've learned is that there is an honesty and a sincerity to him that's really rare. He speaks truth to power. And I think what you see with this is that he sees an injustice and then apologetically speaks that truth against that injustice. And when you do that, when you see it that clearly or understand it and have that confidence, it creates a humility and a kindness and a confidence that just infects everyone around him. And today it's been one of those things where I feel like I've been re-inspired, re-energized, and gained a new confidence in the work that we're doing here in Oregon. And he is literally, putting his life on the line, speaking out against some of the injustices he sees, going after white supremacy, going after the police brutality that we see in this country. These are not easy things to do, and you cannot put yourself out there like that without expecting to get some very harsh criticism, pushback, and death threats. And it's very serious what he's doing, but he's doing it in a way that, when you're around him, you just feel like you've known him your whole life, and he just sees that he just does it with love and compassion. And so my hope is that if you are just a fraction inspired as much as I was today by him today, then I feel confident that we as a community can move forward here in Oregon and actually transform our criminal justice system. So if you're able, what I'd ask you to do is please stand up, give a round of applause, and welcome Shaun King.
Bobbin. Wow, put your hands together for Bobbin, if you will. Bobbin, that was like a manifesto, man. I thought you were giving some introductory remarks, and you came with a manifesto, man. That was legit. Thank you so much. Wow, I hope you all caught some of that was deep and rich. Man, email me that document. I gotta see. No, it had so much depth to it, man, and I'm excited to be here in your presence. I love this city, and I respect the Oregon Justice Resource Center so much, and so many cities around the country don't have this, and it's hard to know what cities have what when you're local, you're living your life, but as I travel all over the country, so many cities need this and don't have it, and you all do have it. And my genuine hope, and it's really why I came, my genuine hope is that you would begin to see yourself as a partner with this organization. So often people ask me where they can donate their funds, where they can partner with, that actually makes a real difference on the ground with everyday people's lives. And the Oregon Justice Resource Center is doing that, affecting everyday people, not just throughout Portland, but all over the state. And they're actually addressing some deep systemic issues as well. So they're, helping people with their immediate legal needs and felt needs, but also fighting back on some complicated legal fronts. And I want to unpack some of that in my time here today. But I've enjoyed my time so much, Bobbin, with you and with the entire staff and the volunteers. I've met so many of you, and I've been to Portland enough where I'm starting to see some familiar faces of people who've seen me at other times where I've been here. And it's kind of weird because some of you know me just from my profile picture. And so for a lot of you, it's kind of a weird experience to see me walking and talking and moving because you only see a Twitter profile picture and 140 characters or a Facebook update. And so I'm glad to be in your presence. I'm a real person, and But I love this city. I used to live in Southern California, and it was much easier then for me to come up to Portland, and we would come up to the Northwest and go to Portland and go to Seattle. And when I would visit on those times, it was very much as a tourist. And I left just thinking like, wow, this city's amazing. Like it's like the perfect city. Okay, I was a tourist. And okay, just before you boo, like give me a second to finish it. But there's an outsider's perspective of Portland. And there are many wonderful things about this city and that attracts so many people. But there's an outsider's perspective that you get as a tourist, as a visitor, as somebody who sees kind of the brochure of Portland and of Oregon. And as I've developed friends here and started to visit in a very different capacity, I start to see that Portland is very complex. Oregon is very complex, starting with its founding, with its history, with its origins. And those origins, you can't disconnect what this city and what this state is now. You really can't disconnect it from why it was ever formed in the first place. And there's some peculiar stuff there. Like, the longer I stay here, I start to say, like, this place is weird. It's cool, but it's weird. Some weird stuff going on here. And it's complex. And the people are nice. And the people do have huge hearts. I've met so many people with big hearts who want to see Portland and want to see Oregon change, but we have to help them and empower them to show them what that looks like. And the Oregon Justice Resource Center is on the front lines of trying to make Oregon, to make its reality line up with its reputation. And for those of you who call Oregon home, you know that it's a bit of a like dirty little secret that the reality of this place doesn't quite match its reputation. And there are many men and women in this room that I met, and I'm so honored that you came out, who've been caught up in that system, be it in the justice system or in the state prisons or in local jails, and you've felt the brutal other side of what this state is about. So much so that if I even thought about doing this, but there was so much that I wanted to say tonight, and there's so much going on in our world that I had a presentation that I wanted to give, but I just wanted us to speak intimately with one another. But if I showed you some stats on criminal justice and stripped the names of the states away and just showed you the stats of some really ugly stuff going on in Oregon, but didn't tell you it was Oregon, you would think it was Mississippi. You would assume it was Alabama. You would assume if you didn't know it was Oregon, and I stripped it all away, and you just looked at the rankings on many of the key issues related to criminal justice, there are times where Oregon is the 49th, 48th on issues of criminal justice. And many of you in the room, because that's not always your lived reality, because you don't see that and experience it, it may come as a shock to you that nationally, when people are talking about states that are really getting it wrong on criminal justice, they're talking about Oregon. I just joined a great team at the Fair Punishment Project at Harvard Law School. And in that community, when we talk about district attorneys, local prosecutors, problems in jails and prisons, when we talk about budgets, when we talk about youth caught up in the criminal justice system, and we talk about states that are really bungling it it's often Oregon that we talk about. Did you know that? Some of you did, some of you didn't. Well, for those of you who did, I hear a couple little amens in the room. But a lot of you are like, no, I didn't know that. I didn't know it. And you're not able to fix a problem that you don't fully understand. And a huge part of what the Oregon Justice Resource Center does is unpack the complexity of the problem so that we can build meaningful solutions together. And today, I want to tell you two stories that maybe you don't know. And maybe I met a few law students. This room probably has a disproportionate number of attorneys. How many attorneys are in the room right now? Just raise your hand. Oh, that's scary. That is scary. It's a scary number of attorneys. These are great attorneys. No, I want to unpack a few things that I didn't know, and I want to unpack it in a way that I came to understand it. I want to tell you a little bit more about myself too, if that's okay, because I want to work with you, and I want us to work together. I live in New York, but I can't explain it, but my heart is really knit to this place, and I want to partner with you the best that I can to help make this city and this state a better place. I feel like Oregon has the potential to really make radical change. I just don't know if it has the heart to do it. And I mean, there's so many of the right pieces in place, but it's about lining them all up, and we'll get into that. But in 2014, I was actually living in Southern California, and I had a wonderful job. I was the director of communications for an environmental charity called Global Green. And before that, see, most of you only know me as like Shaun King, the injustice guy. Shaun King, the guy who is like, now people are calling me like the Nazi hunter. And I'll take it. But 2014, I was working at this environmental charity in Southern California. And before that, I was the director of marketing for an amazing business. Like, I was doing very different stuff than what I'm doing now. Before that, I was doing some stuff that probably would make a lot more sense to you. I worked for years in Atlanta's juvenile justice system and in women's jails and prisons throughout Georgia as a teacher. And right out of college, I graduated at Morehouse College in Atlanta back in 2001. I worked as a high school history and civics teacher for several years. But I moved out to California, and I was the director of marketing for this business. And then I got this great opportunity to be director of communications for this charity. And a buddy of mine emailed me, and it was an email that I had no idea would change my life, but that's how life works, you know. It was a buddy of mine that I went to school with, and he lived in New York, and he wanted to tell me that there was this horrible video on YouTube. And you have to understand, you have to go back in time with me a little bit. This was around July 20th of 2014. And things have changed a lot in those 3 years. Like, when you think of how much has happened from the summer of 2014 to the summer of 2017 for our country, for Portland, like, it's been so much craziness go on in that period of time. Well, there had never been a viral video online of police brutality before. And a young guy, a brave young guy, saw police. At first, he saw police harassing a man that he knew in the community to be a father and a husband and a guy that a lot of people loved and looked up to. And it was not brutality at that point. They were just harassing him. And he decided to pull his phone out and film it. And they continued to harass him. And he had actually broken up a fight a few minutes before the police got there that he was not even a part of. And so there was a melee. Someone did call the police. They came there and they started harassing the man who was actually known in that community as a peacemaker. And so this guy began filming it. And the man that he was filming was Eric Garner. And he thought he was going to film police harassing this guy. And what none of us knew is that police had been harassing Eric for years on end. There's some painful handwritten complaints that Eric made against the NYPD over and over and over again across the years. And what we didn't know, because we just see Eric in this horrible, painful encounter, what we didn't know is that he was already at wit's end, being harassed by police. And then if you start not looking at it for the brutality that's about to happen, if you ever get a chance to watch it, you can stop before they touch him. I'd love for you to see, he just asked them, can you just leave me alone? Why are you bothering me? And he asked them, please, I've done nothing wrong. He asked them to leave. He's nonviolent, unarmed, not being physical. And this brave guy is filming it. And all of a sudden, an officer, Daniel Pantaleo, with a lifetime of complaints, of brutality, of lawsuits, settled and paid for by the city, who is willing to pay the cost for police brutality without ever changing the substance of it. Daniel puts him in a rear naked choke and begins literally choking the life out of this man, who was known as a gentle giant in that community. So much so that he pulls him down, continues to choke him, and we all heard what became an anthem around our country. We heard this man say over and over and over again, I can't breathe. It's a simple thing. And they refused to let go until he died there on that sidewalk. And my friend sent me this video. It had not gone viral yet. And he described it to me. And as I read the description, my first thought was, I'm just being honest with you. My first thought was, there's something missing here. The guy had to have done something. Like, he described a man who did nothing, who was nonviolent, and then was choked to death as people watched. And I clicked the video, and it was just as my friend described, but worse. And I was at that job doing pretty decent work, right? I mean, we were talking about green energy and a clean environment, but I watched that video, and I could not shake it. For the life of me, I could not shake it. It's not that I wanted to shake it, but I couldn't. It was like it was just on me like a weight that I could not shake. And I immediately started thinking, what can I do? How can I make this better? And all I knew to do, like so many of us have done, is it's produced next to no change. All I knew to do was to share the video on Facebook. And my thought was, I had a few thoughts. My thought was, people need to see this. This is wrong. This is dead wrong. And to show you how wrong it was, there's a video that I sometimes show. What I'm doing tonight, I have a thing where I have like a 4-hour workshop that I teach. This is like boiled it down to like 45 minutes. There's a video of George W. Bush doing an interview. It was a random interview on CNN. And they asked him if he had seen the video of Eric Garner. And he immediately says he did. And right away, he says how troubled he was by it. And they ask him, what does he think should happen? And he says, I think somebody's going to be held accountable for this. Anybody who saw it would come to that conclusion. And so I started sharing it. Many of you who've heard me speak before, I taught myself how to like illegally download videos from YouTube. Thankfully, there are a lot of lawyers in the room who could defend me for that if YouTube ever comes for me. And I just said, man, people need to see this. I didn't have a verified account. I was a bit of a public figure, but nothing like I am now. And I was just a dude at an environmental charity. And here's what I thought, and I want to be clear. I had the thought, we're going to get justice for this family. I knew we were. I knew it. And in part, it was rooted in my own ego. I didn't fully understand it at the time. But for a theme throughout my life, had been when I set my mind on something, if I fought like hell for it, it happened. With a few exceptions. By and large, when I went after something and gave it my all, some version of what I was looking to happen happened. And so I became determined to hold Daniel Pantaleo accountable. Then I learned that in New York, they had outlawed the chokehold 10 years prior, and that it was against department policy. And I thought, reasonably so, right? I thought I had a smoking gun. I said, oh, this is it. It's a chokehold. He's dead. Then the coroner ruled that he died from asphyxiation, the state-sponsored coroner. And they ruled the death a homicide. And I said, okay. The coroner said he was choked to death. The video shows him being choked to death. And the move had been banned for over 10 years. I thought that meant, foolish of me, it was naive of me, and many of you in the room in the summer of 2014 were not babies in this struggle against the system like I was then. I did not know that Staten Island had a district attorney who did not mind police brutality. I didn't even know I thought it was so cut and dry, somebody was going to be held accountable. I didn't know that Staten Island had a congressman who didn't really care. And before Mike Brown, the streets of New York and streets all around the country began being packed with protesters from July 17th, when Eric was killed, all the way to early August, when all of a sudden we learn of a guy named John Crawford who shot and killed at a Walmart in Ohio. And then we learn that there's a kid laying in the middle of the street in a town called Ferguson that I'd never heard of. And I made up in my mind, I'm going to do everything I can to fight against this injustice. And that was not even what I was doing with my life. And what I did not understand, and it was a gross underestimation, a major miscalculation from thousands of activists and millions of people around the country and around the world. I did not understand that this system was stacked against us in horrible, egregious, very deep institutional ways, such that they were willing to absorb our protest and just keep on moving. I couldn't believe it. I personally was shocked. And it happened over and over and over and over again. And very few people in the country knew that police were not killing dozens of people or hundreds, that every year they were killing well over 1,000 people. When, back to what Bobbin said, in most countries around the world, most of our peer nations, police in their countries don't kill anybody. Some of them kill very, very few, but most of them kill none. And there are developed nations all around the world whose police have not killed people in decades. In our country, our police kill at least 4 people a day. And we did not know that. The Washington Post won a Pulitzer Prize the next year for creating a database, and The Guardian created a database, and there are many grassroots databases that I use and other people use. We did not know it was as widespread and as deep. But what I did not know, and what I don't think the country still understands, is, and this is what I want to unpack for you, is that for all intents and purposes, police brutality is legal in America. Okay? And I want to get a little nerdy, and there are a lot of nerds in the room, and so I'm glad I want to teach you about two stories, and it's going to unpack how what you see is wrong. It's very wrong. It's horrible, but it's legal. I did not understand that. It took me about 3 years to understand it, and I want to unpack it for you. Are we going to get kicked out at a certain time, or we can go on for a second? Okay. In 1974, a young boy, he was puny, named Edward Garner, no relation to Eric Garner. Edward Garner was 14, and he is like the smallest 14-year-old boy in Memphis. And literally, his autopsy report said he weighed like 108 pounds. And he was a good kid, good grades. He was mischievous. And his story reminded me so much of myself, because many of the decisions that ultimately got Edward killed were decisions I made and all of my friends made as well. Edward got the idea that he was going to go into a home. There was no one in the home. He was going to go into a home and take something valuable out of the home. And I don't think I've ever said this, but I have a book coming out in October, next October, where I do say this. So it's going to come out eventually anyway. But my friends and I used to do that stuff. I'm not proud of it, but we regularly would go through cars in neighborhoods all over our town, and we would go in homes. And I mean, it sounds ridiculous to me now, but we would go in homes and steal PlayStations and Nintendos and CDs and movies, and then just leave, and think nothing about it. Not once were we ever confronted. It's a miracle that someone did not shoot us and kill us doing what we were doing. And Edward Garner, 14 years old, he's in middle school, goes into this home. No one's there. He finds a pocketbook that we later find out had about $12 in it. And he takes the pocketbook. Someone calls the police. The police see Edward scaling a fence, believe that it's him that just left the home, and an officer from a far distance aims his gun at Edward's back and shoots and kills him. Unarmed, nonviolent, petty theft. He might, particularly because of the laws back then, they might not have even sent him to jail. 1974 was a different time. They would not have tried him as an adult. But Edward's father, who was a respected, tough man in that community, could not get over what the Memphis police did to his son. He acknowledged that his son, when he scaled that fence, he had already dropped the wallet. So he technically didn't even have the wallet. But he acknowledged what his son did, but he couldn't believe that they shot him in the back and killed him. And he kept fighting for justice. He said, this is not right. You can't do this. And so he sued the city. And then they swept it under the rug. And Edward Garner's dad would not let go. He was like the family of Emmett Till. If you know anything about the family, and I've come to know them, 60 years later, they still won't let go. They are literally still hiring investigators, still interviewing, still begging for the investigation to be reopened, still trying to hold people accountable. Edward Garner's dad was the same way. He would not let go. I kid you not, he took the case all the way to the Supreme Court. And he fought and fought and fought. That was in 1974 when his baby boy was killed for making a foolish child's mistake. And he fought for 11 years until the Supreme Court finally said, we'll take the case. And they took the case and they made a decision. I'm going to pull my laptop out and I'm going to read something that they said, okay? I'll post this too. If you follow me on Twitter, I posted this article, okay? And you can see I include what I'm about to tell you. I just posted it with you in mind, okay? Let me read something to you. One second. The Supreme Court, it's powerful, it's powerful. The Supreme Court decided on the case, and they saw what I just told you, and they were like, that's wrong. What happened was wrong. It's not right. And in a majority decision, let me read something that they said to you, that they said rather. This is the Supreme Court in their decision. We are not convinced that the use of deadly force is a sufficiently productive means of accomplishing them to justify the killing of nonviolent suspects. Okay, we don't believe you should use lethal force on nonviolent suspects. Then they say, the use of deadly force to prevent the escape of all felony suspects, whatever the circumstances, listen, is constitutionally unreasonable. When Edward's dad saw this, literally, reports from the day, he thought, wow, I fought for this for 11 years. It continues. This is the Supreme Court. It is not better that all felony suspects die than that they escape. Where the suspect poses no immediate threat to the officer and no threat to the others, the harm resulting from failing to apprehend him does not justify the use of deadly force to do so. And Edward's dad and civil rights leaders around the country saw that and thought victory. And they should. What I just read to you is amazing. The Supreme Court just said, you cannot, it is unreasonable for you to use lethal force against a nonviolent suspect. It is better, they say, to let them go than to use lethal force to shoot and kill them. And the family thought, and they celebrated, and they thought, we won. But they said something a few paragraphs down, and it took almost 15 years. I'm going to unpack this in just a second. They said this, and this is down 3 paragraphs. Where the officer has probable cause to believe, that word is key, that the suspect poses a threat of serious physical harm, either to the officer or to others, it is not constitutionally unreasonable to prevent escape by using deadly force. And Edward and a lot of civil rights leaders from the day focused in so much on that first paragraph that I read, where they said it's wrong, that they did not realize that a few paragraphs down, there was a bit of a poison pill there. And it had a word that created, I need you to understand this, that this word is the foundation for modern day police brutality. The word is believe. They ruled in Tennessee versus Garner, the Supreme Court did in 1985, some amazing stuff. powerful. If we wrote it today, it could be the foundation for criminal justice reform and police brutality reform. But right down there, they said, if the officer believes that something dangerous might happen, they can kill you. And it took, now here's why I know, because I have read I read police blogs, I read police training manuals. It took police, this was in 1985, it took them almost to about year 2000 before police started using Tennessee versus Garner to justify their own brutality. And they start in their own manuals and training, in their conferences, which is their legal right, to say, listen, it says if you believe something dangerous can happen, you can shoot to kill. In essence, and not shoot to kill, you can use lethal force. And here's the thing. How can we ever prove that a police officer did not believe that? The only way is if there happens to be a recording somewhere of an officer saying, you know, I didn't really think something bad was going to happen. No, I'm serious. Unless there's something outrageous like that, it is legally almost impossible to prove that that officer did not believe, and they've been trained in a weird way that sometimes even when they don't believe, I've seen officers convince themselves in retrospect that they did believe they were in harm's way. A great case is the shooting death of Philando Castile. There was no harm there. But he convinced himself and the jurors to believe that he did believe it. That's case number one, Tennessee versus Garner. I need you to understand that because here we are, marching. There have been some horrendous shooting deaths in Portland, in Oregon, throughout the Northeast, and throughout this country, and we're marching, not understanding that we are fighting a battle in which we are almost guaranteed we will lose. I'm not saying it's not worth marching, but it's going to be damn near impossible to come up against believe. I got to tell you a second story. Soon after the ruling of Tennessee versus Garner, there was another incident of police brutality, and it's outrageous. And only maybe some of the recent law students have probably heard of it. So don't spoil it. It's called Graham versus Connor. So here I am, organizing people, and I'm starting charities, and we're fighting back against police brutality, not knowing that there was a Godzilla King Kong that was way, way out in the distance. I thought we were fighting something that we could win, not knowing that the weapons we had, the battle we were fighting, we were severely outmatched. And we're outmatched by the law. Until we change it, we're going to continue losing, okay? Graham versus Connor, a crazy, crazy story. Graham, good guy. He was actually a government employee in the state of North Carolina. He worked for the Department of Transportation. And he was a severe diabetic. And he had struggled with diabetes his entire life. A lot of the technology and stuff that we use today was not readily available. This is in the mid-'80s. And he asked his friend to pull over because he feels himself about to pass out. And they pull over at a convenience store in Charlotte where they lived. And Graham's an upstanding citizen, government employee, but he feels himself going into this diabetic moment where he thinks he's going to pass out. And he gets out of the car, runs into the gas station, grabs a bottle of orange juice, and gets in line to purchase it. There are 6 people in front of him in the line. Graham has the thought, I'm going to pass out before I get up here to purchase my orange juice. So he doesn't take the orange juice. He sets the orange juice down, gets in his friend's car, and says, please hurry up and take me home. I have some stuff there that will help. I can't wait for the orange juice. Just take me home. Well, they did not know that there was a Charlotte Police Department officer in the parking lot who saw Graham run into the store, look around, and then saw him run back out. They follow Graham and his friend down the highway for about a mile and put their lights on. Graham is now literally about to pass out. They pull them over, and he says, listen, I saw you rob that store. And it's not even computing to Graham or his friend. Like it was so out, they didn't even understand what they were saying. He was thinking like, what are you talking about? Saw us rob what? And he said, listen, I was in the parking lot. I saw you go in there. You robbed the store. Get out the car. Graham tells him, listen, I'm a diabetic. I'm about to pass out. All this is in the record. I'm about to pass out. I even have my diabetic card in my wallet. Let me show it to you. They yank him out of the car, beat him so bad, tear ligaments all over his body. Then he passes out right there on the road. They call for backup, surround them with police on the highway. The officer who pulled them over and began the brutalization then decides to go back to the convenience store to see what Graham robbed from them. And they go to the convenience store, and the owner's like, what are you talking about? And he said, a man just came in and described Graham. A man just came in, and we thought he robbed you. And the owner was like, no, we weren't robbed. And he said, well, he must have stolen something because he came in, and the man said, no, he was going to buy an orange juice, and it's still sitting right where he left it. They take an unconscious Graham. The officer is Connor. The case is Graham versus Connor. They take Graham, who's unconscious, and literally drop him in his front yard and leave. They admitted to this. They admitted to it. And leave. He wakes up hours later, ligaments torn, face battered, can barely breathe. And he's literally thinking, have I had a hallucination? What has just happened to me? And he realizes, oh my God, the police beat me until I passed out and dropped me in my front. This man works for the Department of Transportation. Like Edward Garner's dad, Graham will not let go. And he sues the police department, he sues the state, he sues Connor, and he won't let go. He fights it in the city, he fights it in the state, and he says, damn it, I'm going to take this all the way to the Supreme Court. What you all did to me was wrong. I got to read to you what they decided, because Tennessee versus Garner looked good, but it wasn't. Graham versus Connor didn't even look good. It's terrible. And it is probably the key foundation to modern day police brutality. I just didn't understand it. Let me read it. Here's what they decided. The key, and both of these have just one word that I want you to remember. The word I want you to remember of Tennessee versus Garner is believe. That the law allows them to operate on their belief or what they claimed they believed. In Graham versus Connor, they determined that the reasonable use of force, I want you to the key word in this one is reasonable, by an officer must be viewed from the perspective of what appeared reasonable in the moment of its application, not from 20/20 hindsight. Let me explain. Officers, according to Graham versus Connor, Supreme Court, this is law, are allowed to act on what they believe is happening, what they interpret is happening, even if they later determine that was not what was happening at all. So the law says, no, those officers believed they were beating an armed robber, which I could still have a case there, right? But because they believed they were confronting a felon who had just robbed a store, you can't judge them because it turned out that he was actually a Department of Transportation employee having an insulin crisis because he is fighting through diabetes. And that they are able to use whatever force they deem reasonable in the moment based on what they think is happening, whether it's true or not. So, it took me 3 years to understand, 3 years of fighting for hundreds of families, to finally come to understand that, let me think, I don't think one family that I have fought for has gotten justice. I don't think I've ever thought of it like that. I don't think one family that I have given everything I know to give to, I don't think one of them has received justice. None of them. I threw everything at it that I knew to throw. I'll call you out on Twitter. We'll lead a march. We'll protest. We'll boycott. And then I finally realized, oh, they are allowed to do this because it's legal. I said all of that to illustrate a much bigger point. We, in our fight for justice in America, are fighting, like, we're coming with water guns. And we don't even have water guns. We have, like, water balloons. Yeah, I don't even know. Like, we have, like, a spoon full of water. We're coming with a spoon and water, and you're trying to run all the way across town with your spoon full of water. By the time you get across town, the spoon's not even wet, right? Like, and we're up against something mammoth. We're not fighting back against injustice in a way that's going to win. That's a painful message for me to share with you. I say that as somebody who has fought for justice regarding police brutality over and over and over again, and keep losing and losing and losing. And I'm tired of losing. I'm tired for these families who never get justice. Until we change Tennessee versus Garner, Graham versus Connor, until we go like Thurgood Marshall on them, no, legit, and find ways to overturn those decisions. Let me give you some context, because Bobbin said it. This is not normal. In most countries around the world, you have to be sure that the threat is real and immediate and obvious. You have to see the gun. You have to hear the man say, I'm about to shoot you with this gun. Like, they will go in other countries around the world, they will go out of their way to make sure they don't use lethal force until it is absolutely required, because their law requires that of them. And here it doesn't. So it ends up with Jordan Edwards, whose family I've come to know and love and care about. A wonderful, brilliant 15-year-old brother outside of Dallas, Texas, who is actually leaving a party in a moment of great responsibility. I spent time with Jordan's family, his mother and father, and they were in their parents' car, and his dad was like, listen, and he already taught them this, if it gets weird over there, leave. So the party had gotten weird. By weird, it just meant they didn't like the energy. They left. And a police officer with an AR-15, who at first insinuated that Jordan and his brothers were either on drugs or drunk, and then suggested that they had guns and had shot somebody, shot into the car and killed George, shot him right in his face, right there in front of his brothers. And we already know, because I'm friends with the family's attorneys, that officer is already saying he believed he's going to Tennessee versus Garner. He's going to Graham versus Connor. I believed that this was what I needed to do because at the moment I thought these were felons who had just shot at somebody. Never happened. Unarmed. The boys had never touched a can of alcohol. Believe me, they tested all of them. They never smoked a joint, never did anything. They were all great kids, even if they weren't. But it's the perfect case to win, except Tennessee versus Garner and Graham versus Connor. It's almost insurmountable. So we are bothered. This is a room of people who are bothered by injustice, right? But in metropolitan Portland, you have some of the worst district attorneys in America. It's just true. And many of them have been bad and in office for decades. Some of them literally treat the position like it's a career position, a lifetime appointment. In my home in Brooklyn, we had our election for our new district attorney on Tuesday. And the turnout for the election was about 9%. There was a poll done recently in Brooklyn asking people to name our district attorney, and only 2% of the people could even name him. So it's amazing that even 10% of the people voted. How did they choose? No, it's real. And so the district attorney position is probably the single most important position locally as it pertains to issues of police brutality, of prosecution. They are the guardians of mass incarceration. And most of us have no idea. I do this all over the country. It's embarrassing. I won't even ask you. I ask people, like, tell me what you know about your district attorney. I know y'all know your stuff right here. Y'all sat in the front and you've been giving me love the whole night. So you know, I mean, I don't mean y'all, I mean somebody 2 rows behind you. We don't know. And so what I'm saying is, who the police are matter. I wrote a 25-part series on how we solve police brutality in America. It's a complex problem. But I have grown convinced that until we overturn Graham versus Connor and Tennessee versus Garner, we're just playing games. That's probably an overstatement. Like, we could reduce it some, and that matters, because reducing it some saves lives. But as long as it's legal, they will do it. And they're trained to do it because they're within their rights to do it. And so we struggle. We don't even have a strong legal argument. It's unethical, it's immoral, it's wrong, but it's legal. Did you know that? Stop. I told you, stop this. Stop. I know you know it. I knew you. Right. We're going to keep losing. And that's not okay. I don't want that. I want to know that we used our energy, our money, our finances, our efforts in a battle that we at least had a chance to win. And we are right now fighting battles that we are damn near guaranteed to lose. I don't like that. That's not how I play. I need to see at least like, here's a little margin of victory, right? Like I need to see a sliver of possibility. That's not what we're up against right now. So you put those laws, Graham versus Connor, Tennessee versus Garner, and then put on top of that a terrible district attorney, an aloof mayor. You put on top of problematic laws, disconnected, aloof, or even vindictive leaders, district attorneys and others, prosecutors. We're in trouble. If you have read a series that I'm writing a series now uncovering corruption in the Bronx District Attorney's Office in New York. And what I've come to understand is those district attorneys were doing what they were doing because people high up made them think it was okay. They were knowingly forcing kids to lie on kids that they had never met before, never seen before. They were forcing kids, threatening them with jail time or beatings. I don't just mean the police, I'm talking about the district attorneys. And saying, if you don't tell this lie on fill in the blank, we will charge you with this, or the district attorneys were saying this, or we'll send the police to your house to beat you, harass you, and assault your family. We documented all of this. And so the kids started doing it. And I don't blame them. So what happened was kids all over the Bronx, to get the district attorneys and the police off of their backs, started telling district attorneys whatever they wanted them to tell. One kid, a brave young brother who has now admitted it, says he testified against at least 50 different kids that he had never met before and that they knew it. Then we proved in my piece, you can see it. I uploaded every video, every affidavit, every file. It's 35,000 words. Where William Stevens, this brave young brother who has now put his life in tremendous danger, said, sometimes I went to the district attorney's office and they made up the crimes right there in the office and thought them out loud, and he would have to sign the affidavit saying this is what happened. They got so desperate that they started asking William to say crimes were being committed against him. Attempted murder, attempted robbery, armed robbery. And then a few families started thinking like, we don't even know you. And couldn't make sense of it. Come to turn out, it was a hustle. From the highest, from the district attorney's office and the NYPD. And if you saw just last Monday, they just, based in great part on a lot of the stuff we exposed, they started dismissing these cases. But yeah, it's great. But guess what? Dismissing the cases, but guess what? Every single one of them still have their jobs. They're still there. Like, they need to be arrested. It is actually criminal. There are hundreds of laws that were broken doing what they did. So when I started seeing that, I realized we have not adequately assessed what we're up against. That's why I love the Innocence Project. It's why I love the Oregon Justice Resource Center, because what they are approaching the problems in Oregon eyes wide open. Bobby, your comments were wonderful. And the way you assessed the problem was spot on. And it takes that type of assessment, and it's going to take that type of assessment for Oregon to actually be reformed. Let me transition to my closing thoughts, and then I'll take some of your questions. Something happened yesterday that I was incredibly excited about for a couple of reasons, but I'm a huge Bernie Sanders supporter, and you know, I didn't ask, I wasn't looking for no love, you know, I wasn't, because there might be some Hillary supporters in here, and we're not getting along so well, and she had to write the book and all of that, and so it's not about that, but for decades, Bernie Sanders has been saying, listen, are you aware that pretty much the entire developed world has universal health care? He's been saying this literally for 40 years. And he's been saying, like, you are aware that almost the entire world has universal health care. And most of the world, did you know that most of the world, they don't even have insurance companies? I didn't know that, because, like, I pay insurance every month. It's an outrageous amount of money. Like, I don't remember a day in my adult life where I wasn't paying a ton of money to insurance companies. Most developed nations don't even have them. It's an American hustle where they have decided to capitalize on our physical pain and ailments, and they've chosen profits over people. Whereas most developed countries in the world, by most I mean almost all, have universal health care. If you're a citizen of that country, you have 100% coverage, and in most countries, you don't even pay a copay. In most countries, you don't even have a deductible. In many countries, they also even cover your dental care. It's just covered. It's paid for by your taxes, and that's just it. Where our country chooses a lot of other things, primarily war and mass incarceration, and the money that other countries are using on health care, our country uses on war and mass incarceration. We've just chosen a different path. It's not security. They didn't choose security. They chose war. Okay, it's not about security. Plenty of countries around the world are very, very safe. And they spend a fraction of what we spend in the name of security, but it's on war. And it's a machine. Yesterday, Bernie Sanders introduced Medicare for all. And what was powerful was, for the first time, he's introduced this bill over and over and over again, and it's like crickets. Like to the point of almost embarrassment. And literally, his entire life, not a single person has co-sponsored the bill. Nobody. Things have changed so much that yesterday, 16 senators co-sponsored it. And I mean, it was a big deal. Here's why that's a big deal. It was the first time in a very long time where politicians, which is like, it's almost like, if somebody calls you a politician, it's like, shut your mouth. What you call me no politician? Like, that's a terror, you know, that's how people think, not you. But nationally, like, if you've seen the approval ratings for Congress, it's horrible. And it's the first time in a long time that Democratic senators said, let's be for something that's radical for our nation, not radical for the world. It's normal for the world, but radical for our nation. And the plan is very ambitious, and it has a 0.0% chance of getting passed through the current Congress. It could potentially get passed through a Democratic-controlled Congress, which we just had 8 years ago. This current Congress, they can't even pass their own bills. Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the presidency, and for 8 years they said, repeal this. Then they got control of everything and couldn't repeal. They couldn't even pass their own bill. Yeah, right, I'm thankful, but it shows you the state of affairs. So this is definitely not going to get passed with the current people in place. But I said that to say something's happening where it's historic. And if you attended when I was here months ago when I spoke in Portland, I spoke about how it's hard to know a moment in history when you're in it. It's hard to know it because you're just in it. You're just living life. But we're in a historic moment where yesterday, people who normally don't stand for big visionary ideas are doing so. Cory Booker, who a lot of my most progressive friends are very skeptical of. People just view Cory with a side eye, and I don't think he deserves it because I've engaged him and I've come to know him, and he's not quite who you think he is. He's a really good, brilliantly smart guy. He introduced on his own a brilliant criminal justice reform bill to decriminalize marijuana all over the country. And not only that, but to expunge it from everybody's criminal record who had ever been convicted for it. And so when I saw Cory do that, or when I saw Bernie do this, and 16 senators, including pretty much the who's who of who's going to run for president, there was some of that at play, but it wasn't just about that. It was about people saying, damn it, let's stand for something. And that, what I see means something's changing. And it's our window of time. Locally in Portland, statewide here, locally in the city, but statewide throughout Oregon, to say, well, what are the changes we can make? I have started fighting for some changes in New York over the past year, and we've actually gotten some stuff passed. Because what has happened is people are so aware that so little is going to happen with Trump that local leaders are starting to say, let's act. Yeah. Say that, they say what? Yeah, they said, fuck it. They're like, let's go. And no, that's kind of what's happening. Where cities previously were not so willing to step out, and states were not so willing to step out. And so there's an opportunity for all these things that we've talked about here. There's an opportunity for Oregon to do it differently. There's an opportunity for Portland to do it differently. Here's what I know, and if you pass me the questions, we'll get. Oh, you're gonna help orchestrate those. Is it will not happen accidentally. It's gonna be a fight. Even in a state completely controlled by Democrats. Like, it shouldn't be the fight that it's going to be, but I promise you it will be. But I am so hopeful. I'm kind of counting on Oregon because there are only a few places that we even have the level of control that we have in Portland and in Oregon. So nationally, a lot of us are looking at Oregon and we're like, I hope they get it. And yeah, like you said, you have to listen to the people. But I want you to understand that I'm working privately with a powerful group of attorneys, and we're thinking about we're going to mount some real challenges to Tennessee versus Garner and Graham versus Connor. And until we do it, it's going to keep happening. And so we used to be in this fight. Like, we've been here before. Like, there was a time where we put our money and our resources and our energy together, and we fought all the way up to the Supreme Court smartly with our best. Like, we've done this before. And what I need you to understand is we're in that moment where we have to organize like we've done in previous generations. Change can't happen in this country. This country has had horrible, horrible moments that it fought back against and changed through. And I believe we're in one of those moments where we are becoming galvanized, but we have to be smart in our fight. So I'm going to try to speed through as many of these questions. How many do you have there? Are they good?
They're all good.
Okay,
They're all
okay.
good. Okay, first question is about the 13th Amendment.
Yes.
Do you think the 13th Amendment should be changed? And maybe you want to explain what that is to people who don't know. The part about being allowed to send people into slavery.
That's great. Who asked that question, if you don't mind? I love you. I do. No, I mean that. No question. That's my favorite question. My entire grad school dissertation is about this. The Civil War in America, it was horrible. And it was the deadliest war in American history. And not only did nearly 1 million people die, which is wild, other recent wars in American history have had in the single digits of thousands. 1 million people died, and over 1 million people were critically injured with limbs lost. It changed our country in amazing ways. And in the middle of the Civil War, first, I'll publish my dissertation so you can see it. There was an original 13th Amendment. Before the 13th Amendment that we know, there was an original 13th Amendment that was proposed in 1861. And it was crazy. This is not folklore, okay? I'll provide the sources and documents. And in the original 13th Amendment, it actually said that slavery was a state issue, and it says that the federal government shall not have the power to overrule states that decide to maintain it. And then it said in there, it also said in the original 13th Amendment, which did not ratify, only because the war broke out. 1861, they're debating this. It has in the amendment that amendment can never be changed. And then literally 2 months later, the Civil War breaks out. And here's what's crazy, and I say this in my dissertation. 3 states ratified that amendment. Like, it was going through the motions. And northern states were approving it because they thought it was the only way to save the Union. They legitimately thought this. The war broke out and they scrapped it. Several years later, they proposed a new 13th Amendment. And how they determined the language, it's 46 words. How they determined the language of the 13th Amendment was so simple and haphazard and thoughtless that in several of the notes from senators at the time, one of the senators said that so many people were out to lunch when they were discussing and debating it, that it really just, the language in our 13th Amendment passed with very few people even caring about it. Like, and then one senator said he knew that the language, because it says in the 13th Amendment, I was always taught my whole life, the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. Actually, the 13th Amendment was the first time where the Constitution legalized slavery. The 13th Amendment, see, slavery was never even mentioned in the Constitution. The word slave or slavery was never even in the Constitution. And they strongly wanted to avoid that. The 13th Amendment then says you can't have slavery under circumstance A, B, or C, but you can have it under circumstance D, which is if you are incarcerated for a crime. And so the 13th Amendment, unbeknownst to what we learned in elementary school, it banned a form of plantation slavery that was horrific and replaced it. There's a book you should read by Doug Blackman called Slavery by Another Name. That came out, he won the Pulitzer Prize for this book. It is, I think, Slavery by Another Name by Douglas Blackman and The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander are kind of like books 1 and 2 in a series. She picks up literally right where he leaves off chronologically. The 13th Amendment is a horrible amendment, and it legalized a form of prison slavery in America. And the 13th Amendment is the bedrock of modern day mass incarceration. And if you read Slavery by Another Name, which I just want to say this, was written by a conservative white man who wrote for the Wall Street Journal. A Southern white man who learned that slavery existed in 1860, 70, 80, 90, 1900, and that companies were making millions and millions of dollars off of it, but they were calling it something different. They were calling it jail. But it was just a replacement for slavery. And so you should read it. There's a bootleg version of a documentary, Slavery by Another Name, on YouTube. It's Douglas Blackman's documentary. It was a PBS documentary. Or you can rent it on iTunes. But there's a real version of it on YouTube, Slavery by Another Name. You should watch it tonight. It's that type of stuff. What's your name? Donna? Well, Sister Hayes, it's that type of essential stuff that we should be fighting against. Like we're fighting this small stuff. And we're not seeing any change. And your question is perfect. Because hear me, that's an audacious battle. Saying, you know what? One person said, and it's simple, the 13th Amendment, we should pass a new amendment that just says slavery is illegal. That's it. Like literally those words, three words, slavery is illegal. And there are lots of other ways people should say it, but the way it is now doesn't say that. So thank you, Donna. Yeah.
I just want to check before I ask this question whether you can hear me at the back. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So I think we only have time for one more question.
I'll answer a couple, but I'll speed up a lot. I'll speed up.
This is a really good question. This is a question from Jack, and he asks, how do we get to a point where we, the people, advance from a position of resistance to power?
Yeah.
Because we're always fighting for what we've gained. How do we get to a point where we're actually remaking society in our own image?
That's a beautiful, well, the question itself, there's so much behind this. A beautiful question, a beautiful thought. And it's revealing because, like, even I'm not against the notion of resist or resistance, but inferred in there was that that's not power. It's a form of power, and we will be resisting because evil will exist, and evil leaders and bad leaders will always exist. But going from simply resisting to creating beautiful revolutionary structures of government and ways to, like, I saw this documentary on jails and prisons around the world, and some of them were so nice. I was like, damn, I want to go to jail in your country. Like, I want to go to your country and be convicted for a crime so I can live in this place. Well, their concept of restorative justice is actually restorative. Their goal is to help you rebuild and resuscitate your life. And they created systems that will actually do that. And so we have to say, and listen, that's what the Oregon Justice Resource Center is about. It's about how can we reimagine systems, rebuilding them from the ground up. And it requires three things. It requires a level of organization that I don't really see right now. I mean, among us. It requires us to be committed to being organized in a way that we're not right now. It requires a commitment that I think we have in us. It's there. I've seen it more over these past 9 months than I've seen it in my entire life. Requires a commitment that's connected to our organization. So now we have a lot of people who are committed but not organized, and that ends up we don't get much done. Highly committed, but to a bunch of nothing. And so in the end, it's like, hey, I'll fight. I don't know what I'm fighting for, but I will be there, and I will show up, and I'm coming. And in a sense, listen, Sister Hayes will tell you, when you've experienced trauma, she lost her grandson. When you've experienced this trauma, sometimes it just helps when people show up, right? There's something beautiful about, hey, we'll show up and we'll fight. I'm not even so clear on what we're fighting for and what's going to happen, but we're going to be in this fight together. There's something beautiful about that. But the next step, that's a step in the right direction. But an evolution of that is being highly organized, very committed, and then lastly, very, very clear on what we're fighting for. And so we're struggling to get those things all lined up at the same time. So a lot of people who are clear but not committed, a lot of people who are committed but not organized, some people organized but not clear. And so we got to get all of those things at the same time, or else it's not going to work. I'll take one last question, but we're going to, in a second, we're going to ask you to make a financial commitment to the Oregon Justice Resource Center. And for some of you, it would be a one-time donation. For others of you, it could be a smaller monthly contribution. But we're going to ask you to make that. And that's what tonight is, a fundraiser for that. So last question.
What is the single most important thing that we can do right here in Oregon about systemic racism?
You know what? It's not a cop-out, but I don't know that I know. I'd be lying if I answered that. Like, I've been here a few times. I don't know it. I don't know it like I know New York, where I spent 15 years in Atlanta, and I can tell you in Atlanta. Well, that's a step, you know. It is an important step. Ask me something else.
Okay, here's a good one. Schools, the school to prison pipeline that we hear so much about. What can public school teachers do to be part of disrupting the school to prison pipeline?
Great, and we'll close with that. Thank you all so much for your time, and I'll answer this, and then I'm going to pass the mic, and then I actually am flying back to New York tonight. And so thank you. I want to tell y'all thank you for having me. Thank you for, I see your support and your love and stuff online and all that, and it means the world to me. It starts in the schools, and that's why, like, I'm not undressing, but that's why I'm wearing this T-shirt right here. I have this mic on, but my shirt says I stand with Cap, and Colin Kaepernick. He and I have become good friends, and you know, so Colin started these camps for kids, and when I say he started them, I said it in a tweet today, he's packing the bags, he's making copies, like he's writing the curriculum. We stereotype these athletes. He's a college graduate, he has a business degree. He had a 4.0 in high school. Okay, he's a brilliant guy. He could have literally, he got offers to Ivy League schools all around the country for other sports and for academics. but he was so determined to play football that he went to the school that offered him a scholarship to do it. But it's because Colin knows that what happens with kids, often some schools are like prison prep. They are literally, when we say school to prison pipeline, some schools are literally preparing kids for a life in prison. And we talk about this in college Know Your Right camps. Some schools are even using prison language and starting to use criminal justice language. And many schools now have multiple officers who are regularly arresting kids for things that when you and I were in school, we might have got a letter sent home. Now they are arresting kids on the spot. So there are two things that I see that are happening that are radical but essential. Some schools and some cities and some states even have decided to eliminate out-of-school suspension and even eliminate suspension altogether to recreate how students are disciplined, because studies show that school suspension, blows my mind, the numbers on who receives school suspension looks almost identical to who receives the death penalty in America. School suspensions come right down the lines of race and class. So the darker you are and the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be suspended from school. The darker you are and the poorer you are, the more likely it is that you'll receive the death penalty in America. The same philosophy that determines the death penalty is determining who's suspended in schools in America. So the state of Minnesota and many other school districts are saying, you know what, we're gonna overturn this. We're gonna look at it differently, because they determine that school suspensions are the quickest path line to jail and prison. Okay, when you remove kids completely from the system, it sends them down a dangerous path. And then secondly, my wife is a lifelong educator, and there's something called culturally responsive education. And all across America, kids are not being taught in a way that connects to them culturally. And it's a deep thing to fix, but some school districts around America are starting to say, because here's what they did. They started teaching kids and saying, hey, we have a race-free curriculum. What they really meant is, we will teach all kids like they're white. It's not race-free. You are basing a curriculum as if every child is white, and the materials and all of that were created with white children in mind. And even the way that they're delivered and the way classrooms are managed were managed with a very particular person in mind. And so there's this radical metamorphosis going on in classrooms, and at Teachers College in New York, at Columbia, they are preparing educators to be culturally responsive, culturally relevant, to have a deep understanding that what you teach, like sometimes a curriculum might be made in rural Texas, but then taught in inner city of the Bronx. And it's like, no, that might work for kids in Texas, but it doesn't work in the Bronx. So culturally relevant education is the second thing that's essential there. And there's so many other things, but also juvenile life without the possibility of parole is outrageous. And the Oregon Justice Resource Center is fighting that tooth and nail. The ACLU is fighting it here in Oregon and all over the country. And we fought in New York and won to even raise the minimum age of prosecution so that kids aren't treated like adults. And so there's so much room for innovation. I want to welcome back up, I think maybe it's Amy, you're coming up. But thank you all so much for having me. Enjoy being here. Thank you. sir.
Thank you.